great results. Don't go anywhere where you're going. Yeah, stay down. That's better. Yeah, everybody can. Oh yeah. Any questions? Any questions? Yeah, from Cork. Or you're not from? Sorry, I was going to ask.
Thank you. Amazing project with some brilliant results. I was wondering if you've seen any differences in physical ability between the animals that go through the delayed release and their wild counterparts, and if you have to mitigate for that through your project, or are they simply able to get into physical condition to match their wild counterparts?
Yes, that's a good question. We are measuring the weight and different physical aspects, and we don't find any difference between them. So we believe that the main difference is that chicks that are hatching in the wild, they usually fledge in mid-August, and then they start migration in mid-September. So they have only 1 month of learning everything, which simply is probably not enough. And the birds that we release in the spring, we release them now in June, so they have 3-4 months that they are exploring the area, learning from other birds, so they have this better experience, and this makes the difference. And we believe that in the past, when the population was much bigger, this was not such a problem, because the juveniles could easily meet other birds to follow on the right migration route. They form these congregation sites. But now that the population is so small, they simply don't have enough birds to meet and to follow. That's why they are disorientated, and they just follow their instinct to go south. And they end up.
Thank you very much. One last quick question.
Thanks, Warren, for your presentation. Do you also have feeding place for the vultures in the area where you work with? Because I know that FWFF, we're working with them, do that. So do you need to do that also for the area where you work?
Yes, the release aviary is at the feeding station. So it's a big fenced feeding station where we regularly provide food, and we gather up to 20-25 Egyptian vultures from different ages, and up to 200 griffons, 20-30 Cinereas vultures, so it's the largest feeding station in that area. And also there is a network around 4 more feeding stations that are smaller and not so regular, but they are also visiting and are good feeding sources. But for us, it's also important to see from the GPS tracking, we see that birds are also exploiting natural food, so they learn to find food by themselves. And this is also very important for us. That's why we are showing them that different things can be consumed because they need to survive even after they leave the area. But yes, we do that.
One quick question.
Okay.
The last one. Last one. Thank you for the presentation. Did you detect any poaching activity in the local community? How react to this reintroduction project?
The local community in like 20 kilometers radius around the release site is very positive. Every year on the tagging we organize events with hunters, with school children, with local mayors we invite, so that they can come, they can touch the birds, can take photos with them. And we work there for over 30 years with vultures in general, so the local community there is fine, they support it. However, we had a case with a bird that was poached about 40 kilometers away from that area, in area where we were not so active, and unfortunately the guy that killed the bird, he killed it because he didn't know it's protected species, and this was a red lamp for us, so we expanded now the area where we do communication and talk to mayors and to hunters in order to cover also further areas, because this was a bad case that we don't want to happen.
Thank you very much. Another round of applause for Okay, so our next talk is from Sydney, and I have to look at my phone because, quite frankly, I think the species is made up. The Beersheba fringe-fingered lizard. I mean, any species that begins with beer has got to be worth listening about, right? It's bear. Bear. Less interested
Hi everybody, excited to be here. I'm Steffi from Ibarium Animal Park. I think I'm going to do this. Great. From Ibarium Animal Park and from the Ben-Gurion University and Beersheba, Israel. So the Beersheba fringe-fingered lizard, which way? This way. Okay, it's named after our city, and that is why we have a huge interest about the species. It is endemic to our area, and it's got the name Beersheba in all 4 languages that you can see in front of you, even in Latin, Contilictus beershebensis. It is critically endangered since 2006, is endemic to our area, and a recent, a recent assessment assessed the remaining suitable habitat as 460 square kilometers with up to 10,000 individuals, but this was just an expert assessment without any actual data. This is the key findings from my PhD research, which I attempted to increase the scientific knowledge about the species and to help focus conservation efforts. So this is a ground-dwelling lizard endemic to the lowest plains, as I've said, insectivorous, with home ranges of approximately 600 square meters. We attempted to map the remaining suitable habitat to locate areas for conservation, high priority areas, to assess the population persistence over time, and to see which factors affect the population persistence. We all know that anthropogenic drivers are the main cause for biodiversity loss and for climate change. We also know that land use change is one of the most significant drivers causing habitat loss and habitat deterioration. Therefore, in order to preserve species, we must identify correctly their distribution and niches and increase our knowledge. So in the past 25 years, species distribution models have been widely used in order to produce distribution maps. What these models do is they statistically correlate between known occurrence records and environmental data in order to produce some sort of distribution map. However, contemporary niche theory acknowledges a 3-part concept of the factors affecting and limiting a species niche and distribution. This concept is known as the BAM concept, which envisions the ecological space where a species can exist as determined by its biotic environment, its abiotic requirements and conditions, and the species movement abilities. Therefore, species can only exist where all these 3 factors overlap. Therefore, species distribution models have been receiving increasing criticism because they fail to mechanistically model the distribution of species. So they don't include demography dynamics, dispersal dynamics, and biotic interactions. So this is what I attempted to do in my PhD research, first to create a species distribution model for the remaining suitable habitat, increase our knowledge about the demography dynamics and population dynamics of the species, and then to combine it all into a mechanistic modeling approach, which incorporates also the factors I've said, distribution, dispersal, and population dynamics. This is our study area surrounding the Beersheba city in Israel. That's where I live, in the middle of the Negev desert. It's a completely different environment from here. This is the historical range of this species. It is extremely endemic and very, very specific to our area. So let's begin with a species distribution model. So I collected 505 observation records from 4 different data sources, including fieldwork of my own, and then correlated it with abiotic data such as annual rainfall, the Worldclim 19 bioclimatic variables, land cover, soil groups, vegetation cover, and topographic layers such as elevation, slope, and aspect. And this is the results that I've produced. The red area are the remaining suitable habitat. So the model showed that there are 995 square kilometers left for the species. The gray area are built in archaeological areas. Of the remaining suitable habitat, only 9% is protected by nature parks and reserve, and about 60% of the area is within closed military zones, which are closed to the public, so they can be considered semi-protected. That's the white, the green is the conserved areas. Okay, moving on to our demography dynamics. So this is a general life cycle of the species. Adults produce eggs, the eggs hatch into hatchlings grow into subadults, and the subadults grow into adults. So we wanted to measure and quantify the vital rates and life history traits of the species, and we did it, of course, using ex situ data. So we got permits to capture 10 gravid females from the wild and keep them at an Bali Animal Park in order to measure growth, survival, fecundity, and longevity. So these are the results. I'm just going to focus on two main things. It was thought that the species only produce one clutch, and then the females die, and there's no overlap between generations. What we saw in the lab that they produce between 3 to 5 clutches, and they can live even more than 3 years. So this was newfound data that adults live more than a year and they produce more than one clutch. All successful hatchlings were from the first and second clutch. So combining the observation records from the first model and this data from the laboratory, we successfully described the life cycle of the species and how the distribution of life changes across the year. And using this, we created population models, stochastic and deterministic models, in order to see whether the population should be increasing or decreasing using the data that we collected. So both models showed a positive population growth rate of 1.03 and 1.02. A number above 1 means the population is growing, below 1 means the population is decreasing. So, and the parameters that had the most effect on the population growth rate were the probability to produce a second clutch and the survival of subadults and adults during the summer. So to further emphasize this, this is a deterministic model. We decreased by 10%, 20%, etc. These factors in orange is the probability to produce a second clutch, and the others are survival of subadults and adults. And you can see if we decrease it by 10%, the population exhibits a negative population growth rate. Same thing with the stochastic model. Once we decrease from 99% to 0.9% the probability of producing a second clutch, the population exhibits a negative population growth rate. Same thing with the extinction probability. As we decrease the population for a second clutch, the probability of extinction increases. And similarly with the time to extinction. So time to extinction got shorter as we decreased the population, the probability for a second clutch. What all this data tells us that if the species does not produce a second clutch, it should not be here evolutionary. We would have not seen it. And now moving on to the mechanistic modeling approach, which combined these two models and dispersal dynamics into a new model. So we took the habitat suitability map produced by the SDM and correlated it. We added layers of carrying capacity, initial population, which was randomly distributed across the population, and dispersal barriers such as agricultural areas, roads, railroads, etc. And then we let the population just simulated it for 50 years and let it run using the viral rates that we've collected. So this is just one simulation to show you how it works. In the background you can see the habitat suitability map in black and white. The white areas are the most suitable habitat. And the dots are the individuals coexisting over time. Red areas are high density with large number of individuals. The small green dots are less numbers of individuals. And we can see what happens to this population over time. Of course, we replicated it for many replications, 100 replications for each scenario. And we constructed 3 scenarios. One, the constant habitat model. So let's preserve all the 995 left of suitable area, and let's see what happens. We also did a habitat loss model where I took residential plans which are already approved by the government and added them into the model, taking the temporal situation. So each plan has a different year it's going to be incorporated into. So you can also add the time to this model. And the third model was also reintroducing individuals. So will a reintroduction program help? So we added 1,000 individuals, which is an enormous amount, for 3 years from year 4 to 7. And these are the non-optimistic results. We can see that in all 3 cases, the population decreases significantly. Even in the constant habitat model in green, if you preserve the entire remaining habitat, this species is becoming extinct in front of our eyes. The reintroduction program did manage to increase the population for a little bit, but once we stop reintroducing, it crashes back down. This tells us that the species' sedentary nature and their small dispersal rates have a very, very large impact on the extinction of this species. So this was also, we were able to locate areas of high probability of occurrences to maybe preserve these areas, but again, if we preserve the entire area, it doesn't even help currently. So 73% to 93% that this species will decrease to 500 or 1,000 individuals by 2070. It is a very, very optimistic model using vital rates from the laboratory and not from the field. And the current fragmented suitable habitat will not enable population persistence. So my take-home message, and with this ending, is by integrating modeling methods, we can improve our predictions. Demography dynamic rates collected in ex situ scenarios, such in our zoos, can assist to predict population distributions and extinction risk. And this modeling approach enables to better understand the factors causing the extinction of the species and help focus conservation efforts. The main thing that is available right now for any sort of scenario that we want to implement, we want to restore certain habitat, we want to break the barriers, I can model it again because it's already ready, and we can use it to see what happens to the species over time. Thanks for listening. There are a lot of people to thank. My professor, Ofer Ovadia, in Ben Gurion University, and I want to thank Joel and Nair from the Photo Arc that came especially to Beersheba to take photographs of this beautiful, beautiful species. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you for that presentation. We take one or two questions about the little lizard. Any questions? Yep, Simon? Oh, do that bit, Simon.
Oh, I second that. Wow. Do you have time to do another 3,500 reptile species?
Yes.
Very good.
I just finished, that's it.
Anybody else got any? Yep. From Cork.
Thank you very much. I was wondering if this species, if the gender is determined by incubation temperature of the eggs, and if
We don't know.
okay.
Short and sweet, just like me.
There's another question.
Oh, hi.
Congratulations, good work. Can you refresh my memory about the phylogenetic position of Acanthotactylus bershebensis in the frame of Acanthotactylus genus from the point of view of, say, evolutionary uniqueness?
It
It is basic species or
it is part of the Acanthotactylus genus. We have 6 other Acanthotactylus lizards in Israel, so it is not that distinct genetically, but there is a study that checked the evolutionary tree of this genus, and they are not, they're distinct as a species, but they're a part of this Acanthotactylus genus. If that was your question, and I understood.
Thank you.
Okay. If anybody wants to discuss the methods further on, I just had to be very, very short during this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on, I'd like to invite Sten to the stage to talk about cheetahs and the work that they're doing out in the field. Thank you very much, Sten.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Quickly want to present you some of the latest developments that we are making in one plan approach to cheetah conservation, trying to work out an integrated species conservation plan. So I'm affiliated with the Cheetah Conservation Fund, international conservation NGO that has 2 established field bases across the cheetahs range. It was first established in Otjiwarongo in Namibia in 1990 already, and over the 30 years of cheetah conservation efforts we expanded our activities across the cheetahs range, but recently also a new cheetah rescue and conservation center in Somaliland, in the Horn of Africa, as a response to the emerging threat of the illegal wildlife trade of live cheetah cubs from the Horn of Africa into the Middle East. So we work across the native cheetah range, but we also are much involved with captive population management. The Cheetah Conservation Fund is the international stud bookkeeper for cheetahs, which I think is quite unique for a field-based conservation NGO, and shows our commitment to sort of integrate captive and wild cheetah population and management. So despite our efforts, cheetah populations are still mostly declining across most of the range. We are left with 7,000 individuals in the wild, and because of that continuous decline, we recently organized the first Global Cheetah Summit. In January in Ethiopia, we brought together 130 experts to Addis Ababa, experts with diverse backgrounds. We had field conservationists, we had researchers, government representatives, people from zoos, international institutions and so on, to discuss focal areas of urgent conservation action. We concluded the summit with the Addis Ababa Declaration for Global Cheetah Conservation, and as part of that we are in the process of launching 10 working groups that will focus on various aspects to ensure cheetah survival across their range. This eventually will be presented and updated on the second Global Cheetah Summit 2 years from now. And in the next few slides I'll quickly want to discuss some of the focal areas that some of these working groups will work on. So we have 10 working groups that we are in the process of launching under the Global Cheetah Coalition. We have sort of working groups working on more fundamental aspects, better understanding distribution and future range shifts, towards identifying threats and solutions, and eventually updating and implementing regional strategies. This initiative is inspired by some other large cat initiatives. There is the African Lion Working Group, the Snow Leopard Network. We felt something was missing still in global cheetah conservation, so by doing so we tried to unite all cheetah stakeholders under this Global Cheetah Coalition. So the working group focusing on population and distributions will focus both on the wild population as well as the captive population. As said, we are left with 7,000 cheetahs in the wild, distributed across 33 populations, of which 20 have fewer than 100 individuals. The focus here will be to identify conservation priorities, both from an ecological perspective as well as from a social-political perspective. Some cheetah populations might be under high threat because of their small numbers, but if the social-political situation doesn't allow to implement any conservation action, we'll have very little return on investment, and we rather focus on where we know conservation efforts have more successes. We'll bring in cheetah conservation units here as well, looking at the different subspecies. We currently recognize 5 subspecies, and that will help in delineating some of these conservation units. The captive population is distributed over 305 facilities in 44 countries, at least accredited facilities. The idea really here is to better understand how we can improve breeding programs, and increasingly look as well whether we can select potential candidates for reintroduction programs. A cluster of working groups will work on various conservation threats, try to identify which threats are most pressing in which region, especially the threat of illegal wildlife trade in the Horn of Africa will require a lot of attention because it's quite new. But human-wildlife conflict and the threat of small populations will require a lot of attention as well. And we're in the process of running some population viability analysis under different scenarios, different population sizes, different off-take rates, and augmentation scenarios. The cluster will look at conservation solutions. We really try to emphasize on spatial planning and mapping these priorities, which threats are highest in which regions and which conservation solutions can appropriately be implemented in response to this. So cheetahs mostly live outside of protected areas, try to look at where cheetah conservation efforts can complement the current protected area network, and where do we need to sort of implement and establish community-based natural resource management programs. Try to identify the introduction sites and standardized protocols that we're working on the same direction. Much of it will depend on good government support and relations, and as well having the right people to implement the actions, so building capacity, training, and organizing train-the-trainer programs. Critical aspect in all of this is acquiring enough funding, and for this we did a piloting exercise where we tried to estimate the annual cost of cheetah conservation. I think it's quite important to get an estimate there, which was based on various actions that we identify as most important for cheetah conservation, where we derived the annual cost per unit area based on a long-term conservation programs, and then based on a selection of actions depending on the region, we came up with a cost estimate of around 38 to 540 million US dollars. To put this amount in perspective, a similar exercise was done for lions. There it was estimated that 1.2 to 2.4 billion US dollars was required. The difference lies in that lions mostly occur in national parks. National parks being government managed, they might require some more continuous funding than investing in community-based programs, which has an initial investment cost, but the idea is in the long term that they are more self-sustaining. And then to put those numbers in perspective, the 30 by 30 objective, protecting 30% of our planet by 2030, the annual funding gap is currently identified to be 103 to 178 billion US dollars. So we really need to think of how can we scale conservation efforts and reach tap into enough funding, and we are increasingly looking at new and innovative funding mechanisms, and putting a cost estimate on the annual cost of cheetah conservation will definitely help in tapping into these mechanisms. We also increasingly think of how can we phrase cheetah conservation within broader socio-ecological development goals. Ultimately, the goal of protecting cheetahs in the wild is protecting open savanna grasslands, which support high biodiversity, but which also support human livelihoods by producing enough grazing forage and such, and phrasing cheetah conservation as within these broader socio-ecological development goals might also increase some more engagement. So ultimately, all of the work that these working groups are looking at will be combined and implemented in updated regional strategies and action plans. An initiative that is led by the Africa Range-wide Cheetah Conservation Initiative, and I think much of the information that we will be working on over the next years will help in ensuring proper implementation. So yeah, thank you for having me, and also thank you to all the zoological partners that are supporting us in one way or another, whether it's financially or through different kind of resources. That's a critical aspect of our work, and we look forward to continue and establish new partnerships.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions about cheetahs? No questions? Well, you're around all day, all week, so grab him in the appropriate way. Okay, so next I'd like to invite Andrew up to the stage. Hello. And Andrew's going to talk. Andrew's from Rewild, and he's going to be talking about his work in Vietnam and Laos.
Hi everyone. Well, first off, thanks for hosting me at the conference and for listening to this talk. I'll be speaking about a topic I'm very passionate about, which is protecting critically endangered species in the Annamites region of Vietnam and Laos. So for those of you who don't know, the Annamites is a mountain chain that runs along the border of Vietnam and Laos and then arcs down into southern Vietnam. And this area is special from a biodiversity perspective because it has one of the highest concentrations of endemic species found anywhere on a continental setting. So you have amazing primates, you have 2 species of deer, a pretty cute striped rabbit, shepherd tane, and of course all of us, I'm sure, know the sao la. But there is one big issue in the Annamites, and that is widespread snaring for supply illegal wildlife trade. Snaring is threatening all of the ground-dwelling species in the region, emptying forests, and of course causing an extinction crisis for the species in that area. Now, snaring is primarily done to supply the illegal wildlife trade rather than for subsistence, and the magnitude of snaring in this part of the world is really difficult to comprehend if you haven't been to this area. A colleague of mine estimated that there are approximately 12 million snares in the protected areas of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and that's probably a vast understatement. So not surprisingly, with that level of snaring in the region, all of these ground-dwelling species are threatened with extinction. Some are much closer to extinction than others. And so with that background in mind, several colleagues and I started thinking a few years ago about the urgent need to integrate in situ and ex situ conservation to protect many of these species with really two goals in mind. The first is that in the short term, to secure ex situ populations for highly threatened Annamite species to avert their immediate extinction, and then in the long term, to use these populations to rewild highly depleted forests in the Annamites, because for forests to be healthy, for these ecosystems to be functioning, of course they need wildlife in them. Today I'm going to be focusing on the short-term goal, simply because I don't have enough time to go into all of the work that my colleagues and I are doing to support reducing snaring in key protected areas, to actually making protected areas function. But if you'd like to know more about that, catch me during a coffee break and I can talk your ear off. So, we've really focused on coming at this from both a top-down and bottom-up approach. Top-down because if we're going to change, integrate ex situ conservation at the scale needed, we need government buy-in at the highest levels. But bottom-up because some species simply don't have the time to wait for high-level government policies to come together. And so we're very much approaching this from top-down and bottom-up levels, and hopefully these initiatives meet somewhere in the middle. I'll start with the national level engagement. One of the first questions that I get, at least when speaking with high-level government officials, especially in Vietnam, is why do we need to invest in ex situ conservation? Why do we want to risk pulling animals out of the wild and putting them in a facility? And the answer, of course, is that many of these species are highly threatened with extinction, populations are very depleted, but it's very helpful to have data to back up statements like that. And so my colleagues and I at the Leibniz Institute for Zoo and Wildlife Research have compiled an extensive camera trapping data set across now more than 30 protected areas in Vietnam and Laos to show in a very rigorous way that yes, populations for all species in these forests are very depleted, and for some highly threatened Annamite endemics, we don't have much time to lose. So we have now scientific evidence to back up these statements, and that's really helpful when communicating with local stakeholders. We've also done PVA work to actually outline the direction that ex situ conservation work would take if we are to actually integrate this at the highest levels of government. And of course, we've communicated these results to government officials in Vietnam, and working really on co-creating a vision for saving critically endangered Annamite species and long-term rewilding. And those conversations are now continuing with the Ministry of Natural Resources to develop a national rewilding strategy. So that's the high-level engagement, but I want to get into some specific project work. These are the grassroots efforts that are really, I think, driving differences on the ground as we speak, and I'll be focusing on 4 species that are very close to me: crested argus, large-antlered muntjac, striped rabbit, and silverback chevrotain. So, for those of you who don't know crested argus, it's a large, spectacular bird that's found only in the Annamites. The species was recently split. And we're in very early discussions with Saigon Zoo about scaling up conservation breeding for crested argus. The zoo has a small population of 30 to 40 crested argus, but they're lacking space, they have limited capacity, and most worrisome is that they're running into breeding issues, especially around defects, probably because of low genetic diversity. And so we're talking with the zoo about scaling up these efforts to build staff capacity, build additional facilities, and hopefully have a facility where we can do large-scale breeding for rewilding. The Saigon Zoo has a large off-site facility that they've offered to let us to use for this work, and most importantly, there's a shared vision around the importance of conservation breeding for rewilding in the future. So very, very early days, but promising nonetheless. For large-antlered muntjac, a critically endangered species, we've conducted a range-wide review of the species status across Vietnam and Laos, and a little bit into Cambodia. And what we found is that there are essentially 4 sizable populations of the species, a few animals here and there in between, but 4 core populations. And my colleagues and I have actually visited each of these regions to scope options for conservation breeding in each of these 3 range countries. And I could have a separate presentation on this, but to make a long story short, we've decided to focus on Laos because it has the largest populations, and we have 2 partners who have expressed an interest in actually working with us on this project. The next step is going to be working with government to outline an action plan and actually get buy-in for active captures. That process might be long, but we're encouraged that it's not an insurmountable obstacle. Going on to striped rabbit, this species is actually in a very positive situation. We have a couple partners in Vietnam who have expressed an interest in holding the animal. And so having space for the species is not the problem. The problem that we face is finding animals to source. Fortunately, over the past couple of years, we've worked with rangers to actually get local knowledge about how people actually find and capture these animals, because we know this is happening. And we've obtained a wealth of information about how local people actually go into the forest to find the species. And so we have names and addresses of people who have said they can find the rabbit for us once we have a facility in place. And we've also identified people who are in both Laos and Vietnam who are actively selling rabbits in wildlife markets. Bad news for the species, good news for the fact that we can use these sources to actually confiscate animals and move them to a breeding center. So again, uncovering options for actually sourcing these animals to start a conservation breeding population, and we've made a lot of progress on that front. Next steps is going to be to formalize frameworks to legally get these rabbits to these facilities, and working with experts to ensure proper care, which we're doing with the Striped Rabbit Working Group. And then I know I'm running out of time, so save the best for last. You're fine? Okay. Well, good, because this is my favorite one. This is the silverback chevrotain, Tragulus versicolor. For those of you who don't know, this is a small mouse deer that was quote-unquote lost to science, at least, for almost 3 decades. Nothing was known about the species. My colleagues and I set out to try to rediscover it in 2017-18, and in 2018-19, we were lucky enough to get the first camera trap photos of the species in the wild, confirming its survival, and we put out a publication about this. Now this is it's a special species for many reasons, but one of which is that it lives in, it's an extreme habitat specialist. It occurs only in very dry, almost desert-like habitat, as you can see if you follow a couple colleagues of mine. And this habitat is limited to a very small part of Vietnam. So essentially it has, we think it has one of the smallest distributions of certainly any Tragulus species, but potentially one of the smallest distributions of any ungulate species in the world. And if you have a small distribution, Vietnam is not the best place to be because of the snaring issue. We've worked very hard the past few years to map out the distribution of the species and understand its conservation status. We've found 5 populations to date. We think there might be 1 more, maybe even 2, but probably not more than that. And as you can see, the distribution is very small, really hugging 3 provinces of Vietnam and right along the coast. The species occurs in only a single protected area, which is good. one of the species is somewhat protected, but in that protected area there's a lot of snaring, there's substantial habitat degradation from livestock, and there's also a lot of development. The core area for the species in the single protected area was just degazetted this year and will be essentially clear-cut for development. So there's really an urgent need for an insurance population, in my opinion. And my colleagues and I have been working on this for the past few years. Fortunately, or unfortunately, it's a mixed bag, there are animals coming in from the trade quite regularly. The species isn't targeted in any way, but it's caught as part of the usual catch for snaring. And so we think sourcing these animals from the trade will not be an issue because it is coming into wildlife markets fairly frequently. And sometimes it's coming in alive. The big issue is that we don't currently have a facility to hold the species. We've tried to move a couple confiscated animals and they've died in transit. Tragulas are very flighty and fragile, so that's not surprising. The government came to us and asked for a site basically within the species distribution where we could keep the species. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build a facility in the national park. And just a couple months ago, the national park officially signed off on this project. So we have permission to build, and a colleague of mine, Jeff Holland, has actually been out to the site to do all of the planning. The only thing we're missing now is funding, which is great because usually all of the permissions processes are what actually holds up real conservation. And I should mention that we have a very young, passionate Vietnamese conservation scientist here named Quy, who's made it his life work to drive this forward, and that makes such a difference with moving things along on the ground. So, next steps are to formalize frameworks to legally obtain animals from the trade. The government has also mentioned going in and capturing animals. We're talking about that with them now. And then, of course, build staff capacities for keeping the species in this facility that we hope to build this year. Just building a facility is not enough. We need to ensure that there are best practice standards and staff to implement those standards on site, which is going to be an enormous task. And then, of course, working with technical experts, hopefully people in this audience, to ensure best practice care and handling. So, again, nothing has been built yet, but things are moving very quickly in a very positive way for this species. So, with that, I'd like to thank you and to say that all of these projects are very much grassroots and highly collaborative. So, if anybody would like to be involved in this work or help out in any way, please drop me a line. I would love to chat, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and sorry for giving you a heart attack at the beginning of your presentation. I had one job to do, and I caught it up.
That's why I had more than 5 minutes.
Yeah. Sorry. Any questions? Rick?
Thanks, Andrew. It's nice to see that your passion for gender minds is still on. For a long way since the Sao working group. My question is, are you sure that you will get the permits to get these animals? Because we know that this is the more difficult part of the project normally. And I wonder, you are investing in 4 species in 4 different places. To get all this done, it's a giant thing to do.
It is. The permit process and the permissions is more complicated than even I thought it would be, because there isn't seem to be a clear step 1, 2, 3 in Vietnam, at least. In part because I think people haven't thought about conservation breeding in this way before. So I think we're forging a lot of new ground. I'm confident that if we have, well, put simply, if we have the right people and the right political permissions saying we want this to happen, I'm confident it will happen. And to me, that's engaging with national park directors and members of the People's Provincial Committee in each of these provinces. That's the information I've been told, that if you get them on board, they'll make it happen. And so that's where we're investing most of our efforts. In Laos, it's really uncharted territory. I don't know how or if we'll get permission to capture large antlered muntjac. I'm largely relying on local partners to try to figure that out, so stay tuned.
Are you working with the Sala Foundation? Or?
We're speaking with them. Yeah, I know Min is actually working quite hard on getting permissions to capture large antlered muntjac for her PhD work. So yeah, in conversations with Min.
Great. Any more questions for Andrew? No one told me there'd be exercise involved in this.
I can do it.
Thank you, Andrew. I was just wondering, and it's a little bit of a tough question because you mentioned a few times these animals could potentially be available from the trade. With some of the songbird issues that we've had and worked with in the past years, it's been a reoccurring issue of tackling not only the legality but also the ethics of acquiring animals from the trade when the trade is still ongoing and populations are still being affected by the trade. Do you have any novel ideas for us, or do you have any approaches to how you're tackling it?
It's a good question. It's a really hard question. I think there are ethical issues, of course, with sourcing animals, buying animals from the trade, because you're supporting the issue that's driving these species into extinction. I have my own personal thoughts on this, which is for some species that appear to be on the edge, that if it's possible to work legally within existing frameworks to get animals legally confiscated, in this case by local forest protection department, then yes, that is appropriate. When you start talking about purchasing animals, especially if that's done by private individuals, I think you're getting into much trickier ethical territory. So I've tried to avoid that route. But working through existing frameworks, it's much slower, actually this ties in with Eric's question. It's much slower, it's clunkier, but I think that's the safer way to go, and it's the more ethical approach.
Oh, sorry, Mel. Any more questions for Andrew? No, we're good. Thank you very much, Andrew. Now I welcome Marquita up to the stage, and Marquita is going to talk about synergizing conservation education and her case study in Senegal. The stage is yours.
Those were just great presentations, and I'm modestly really pleased that I can be within this society, but I'm only going to present results from education programs, so we are back at the communication level. And at the top of all that, I will tell you, I will present it as an example of failed program. Hopefully, at the end of the presentation, I will draft some ways how to approach it and how to avoid the mistakes that we committed. Conservation education activities that we are going to talk about happen in Senegal within Western Derby. And conservation, which is critically endangered, it naturally only occurs in one national park in Senegal on its east side, and there are two semi-captive reserves on the western coast of the Senegal, the Bandia and Fatala reserves. First environmental education programs ran in 2008 and 2009 in Fatala Reserve, and they were designed by conservationists from Czech University of Life Sciences Prague, who also collected pre and post data. Those data then served as a base for an article showing that children's specific knowledge about some animal species and some conservation-related problems increased. But we had no clue actually what impact that education programs had on attitudes of children, and already by then we knew that are more important and they have more impact on behavior change than the knowledge. So, the next time we were designing education programs, we approached it a bit differently. This time it was in Bandia Reserve, and we incorporated some features, activities that are reported to influence attitudes. So that would be storytelling, role play, or we even employed the natural excursion. Fun fact, we compared the results of children that went to the reserve and that stayed in the classroom, and what do you think? The results were the same. So we invested the money into something that had not more impact than if we only talked to children in the classroom. But this is not subject of this presentation, because I would like to dig a bit deeper than that. What was the conclusion of this research? Positively increased knowledge. We know that from our education programs, even the anthropocentric attitudes weakened, pro-conservation attitudes increased, and we could say, well, nice, PhD defended, end of the story, goodbye. But I did that mistake and I asked tough questions. I thought, what does this actually mean for Western Derby eland conservation in Senegal, and how does rather random biological or ecological knowledge, or even pro-conservation attitudes affect success of antelope conservation in Senegal? And what is a link of the school children living far or close to the reserve to threats that Western Derby eland is actually facing? I realized, sadly, that I relied on assumption that those children will one day maybe come across a situation where they will remember that their attitudes were altered and they will start behaving the correct way. But the big problem here is that I didn't know what the correct way was, and I didn't know what the behavior was. So with this having in mind, second half of the presentation, with this having in mind, we designed an absolutely different approach. And if I knew Julian Vanessa before, I would have known that education must come within the conservation activities. It is not enough just to put it aside of the conservation activities and kind of hope that it will bring something. So when we had a chance, we employed a completely new approach to planning education activities with team working with communities in Nyokolokoba National Park. And I had important insight from colleagues with extensive experience from development and humanitarian cooperation. Together, we employed a methodology that enabled conservation managers and staff to find a place of education in overall project logics. So it was already incorporated in the project logics. So the methodology is different for each team, with different capacities and on different level of the planning. But if you're wondering where the hell is education here, it is on the point 5. So we can't start planning education activities until we have all 4 previous points well defined. The team composed of representatives of DP, the Direction des Parcs Nationaux, Pantera and ZSL London, while the conservation team saw the objective had to be shared within those organizations. Then we proceed to identification of target groups and conservation problems that are related to them. I think this table, you will like it, because we cross-linked the conservation problems with the target groups, and what we found out is that the primary school children are the only group that is not linked with any of the conservation threats that Western Derby Eland was facing. And yet, it was the only group that our education programs were pointing at. I did that mistake, the national park did the same mistake, many partners did that mistake, and I think it's very common because the school children are just easily reachable and easily organized, and we might be tempted to use them as very common target group. Then we assessed, we prioritized those problems by assessing their severity and feasibility. And until now, we only worked in office with perceived problems, and now was time to reach out to the target groups and confirm office assumptions. And we did. And then we are at the point 5, where the education can or doesn't have to be employed. So when we had all this information gathered, we decided how to overcome the barriers or the problems that we are facing, and what activity, what intervention will serve the purpose the best. It can be education, but it doesn't have to be education. And if there is no possibility that educational outputs will achieve the goal, will help to achieve the goal of the project, it is up to us to consider whether we employ or not the educational activities. The choice of activities is easy, we all know that, and this is what zoo educators can already work with. The same methodology was employed with the Sahara Conservation Team in Wadi Reme, Wadi Achim, and with Akagera National Park Community Team in Rwanda. And I'm not telling that I have tangible results of this approach, but it just seems logical to me that we are more likely to achieve educational outcomes when we know how we want to achieve it and why we want to achieve it. And hopefully that will work.
Thank you, Marquita. Have we got any questions about this project with Senegal? No? What?
Well, thank you for the presentation. I'm just curious how you evaluate the impact on the children, that it was the same when you take them to the field and when they stayed in the class, how you evaluate?
So it was PhD thesis, so yes, it was elaborated methodology. I had two groups. I had 300 children who undertook the program in the classroom, and 300 who undertook the same program in the reserve. And we showed the class was always shown the photos of the animals and were provided with exactly the same information as the field group.
Thank you.
Thank you. No more questions? Okay, thank you very much. Now we're going to ask Daria to come up to the stage from the University of Turin to talk about some levers. Slight house tag. Good luck. Thank you.
So everyone, okay, I'm really excited about to get to tell you a story. I am a researcher working both at the University of Torino and Natura Viva, and our project has been going on since the early 2000s to try and protect some lemur species inhabiting the eastern rainforests of Madagascar. So basically, the area, I'm assuming that all of you already know about Madagascar, hosts an incredible biodiversity, but all of this is severely impacted by the fact that habitat fragmentation and habitat destruction, mainly due to climate change and anthropic impact, are impacting the chances of lemur survival. Lemurs most of lemur species are impacted by, are listed as, okay, there we go, are listed as endangered.
It's not on the screen.
Well, I can go on. Okay. And 1/3 of the species is considered as critically endangered. So, okay, there we are. So the chances of survival basically is severely reduced by the fact that habitat fragmentation and deforestation is mainly due to charcoal production, to conversion of forested area to agricultural terrain, but also because of hunting and still lemur poaching. Animals are poached and mostly because of pet trade to be used as attraction for tourists in many, unfortunately still in many resorts, and as a news of just a few weeks ago, there is still pet trade going on within country, but also outside countries. So, where do fit Marmisa in all of this? Marmisa is a small protected area, 2,000 hectares forested area of mountainous habitat of primary and secondary rainforests, and is located in this in this tiny portion, which is called the Nkanyeni-Dzamena Forest Corridor. This is a crucial point because it connects the last remaining forested areas in the north and in the south of the countries. And here, since early 2000s, the Parco Natura Viva and the University of Torino has been building a research project aiming at biodiversity conservation through the involvement of local communities. In 2009, we built a research center that is the focus of all of our actions. So basically, to preserve the unique biodiversity of Maromisa, but in the meantime also ensure the well-being and prosperity of local populations, we try to develop a community-based, scalable approach to sustainable development of conservation actions, and we do so mostly through the building of a huge network of active stakeholders, both local and international. Our targeted actions encompasses 6 main strands. We go from research to education and habitat restoration, and all of that takes place in the Maromisa multipurpose centers, which is a very nevralgic point of the project. We stay there for months when we are in the field. We do activity of training, green classes there. All starts from this. We do research, and I said in the title, we do observational research, meaning that we do not interact directly with animals. So we don't color them, we don't track them, we just observe them in the natural environment, trying to minimize our impact as much as possible. We, since 2009, habituated groups of red-bellied lemurs, lesser bamboo lemurs, Varecha variegata, so black and white ruffed lemurs, the Edim shifak, and of course indris. So I don't know if any one of you have ever heard or seen an indris in the wild, or heard this peculiar song, but mostly this is the reason behind the whole project. So indris, for 3 reasons. They, still now, we haven't been able to rear them in captivity, so we can just go and observe them in their natural environment, and they sing like that. So they have this peculiar vocal display that it used to interact with the member of the family groups, but also from different family groups. And they sound like that. Well, when we started the project in 2009, there was not much literature on the argument. So when Professor Giacomo came back to Torino from Madagascar, said, oh, let's have what's going on the species. And that's the reason why we started actually studying them. So since then we have been able to do that by basically activities of capacity sharing mainly through the training or research guides that work the project full-time with us, but also by training students from undergrads to bachelor, master and PhD students, but also academic staff. We do carry out activities of educational promotion at the primary school, but also green classes, targeting about 1,000 kids from 10 villages surrounding the forest. A crucial part of the project is the rural development. So here, if I show you the forest, this tiny part, this part, yeah, the yellowish, so the green area is the strict protected area, but the yellow one is dedicated to the local population. We have a parcel system. Small parcel of terrain are given to each family of the village, so the villages surrounding the forest, and they there can grow vegetables, they can breed zebus and so on. Because what we found is that providing alternative sources of food and work is crucial to maintain the longevity of the project, but also of the forest, of course. We do activity of habitat restoration. Since 2016, we have been able to recover 6 hectares of forest by using local plants, of course, and we have targeted a specific part of the forest by using local bamboo, and this area has been recently recolonized by bamboo lemurs. So, as I told you, what we do, where do we do it, how do we do it? Mainly through the institutionalization of cooperation agreements. So first, it's necessary to have a huge network in between universities, local associations, zoos, to try and keep them going. We try to support long-term technological and cultural transfer, not only north-south, so from Torino to Madagascar, but also south-south. We involve the 3 major Malagasy universities, and we have been able to enhance the mobility transfer and cultural transfer in between them. And this led in 2020 to the establishment of the first doctoral school in sustainable development and cooperation. This is a PhD program dedicated to tackle the challenges of sustainable development in marginal areas. And it involves the University of Torino and of Antananarivo. But later on, we built another project co-funded by the European community, and basically this project is in its 2nd years, and by the 3rd one we will be able to establish the first doctoral school in between Torino, Comoros, the 3 universities I showed you before, and La Réunion. And so basically, in sum, the foundation of the project is to provide cultural and material transfer resources to engage local community in initiative to protect lemurs, but also the environment in which they live, and by doing so having both national and international impact. So in brief, I would like to show you what we did in these few years. So Marmisa was put under protection in 2001. In 2008, the forest was, the management of the forest was given to the group of the Tude et de Recherche sur le Climat de Madagascar. In 2009, the project started in between the University of Torino and Parco Natura Viva, when they built the research center. And in 2015, thanks to all these efforts, the forest has been recognized as a national protected area by an official decree of the Ministry of the Environment. And lastly, in 2009, thanks to the knowledge on the spatial behavior of the species we study, we have been able to increase the protected area, basically. So after all these years, we tried to list which were the parameters that can be used as proxy for long-term impact, and I'd like to list them for you. So as beautifully said this morning, radical cooperation is the key. So without networking, we wouldn't be able to do nothing. Building an infrastructure that is really the beating heart of the project could be really helpful and give a sense of belonging. We develop research focus in situ. We can also, and we do so by enhancing technical capacity by using specific training program, and of course we try to involve the local community and especially the future generation to try and raise awareness of the treasure they still have in their hands, and how to protect them can ensure a future for the population, for the lemurs, and the environment in which they all live. So I'd like to thank all of the people who has been working the project since day one, so Dr. Avesani, Caterina Spezio, and Professor Giacoma. There is really a huge network of partners behind the project. If you like to give a look on our Instagram pages or shoot us an email if you want to know more. And I thank you, of course, for your attention, and I do really hope that this is a story of optimism and hope. Thank you.
Do we have any questions on the lemurs? No? Yes.
One question for all people. Why you don't enjoy this fantastic project? Please, you are very welcome. The building there can host you for the night in a very natural situation, and it's an amazing place. Fossa all around, lemurs all around, nice lady all around, like Daria, and so on. So please come.
Yeah, the forest has been open to ecotourism in 2017, so if you'd like to spend a few nights with us, just drop an email and we can organize that. Thank you.
Dr. Avesani will
Thank you very much, and our holiday is sorted for next year. Okay, so it's the final talk of this session, so I would like to ask Ariel to come up and, there you are, wow, from Jerusalem Zoo, and you're going to chat to us about a frog. Lovely, the floor is yours.